Welcome to episode 196 of the Grip Strip Podcast, the Thanksgiving Tithings edition of the Grip Strip Podcast. My name is Philip Matthew. I'm your host. And as always, I'm with my co-host, the iRacing Indy 500 champion, the computer genius, a gentleman, a scholar, and in a much better mood this week since his Jacksonville Jaguars put a whooping on another team. His name is Joshua Fine. What's going on, brother?
I'm doing great, Phil. Great to be back here on this Victory Monday, as you mentioned, with the Jaguars winning yesterday at home. So good to have that. And glad to be back on the show another week. Of course, thankful for a lot of things, and of course, glad to have our buddy Joe Passero back here on the show.
Yeah, we're talking about the NASCAR Cup Series 2023 season. So I figured who else better to bring on than our roving reporter, our general correspondent, our friend who's roamed the East Coast, is in Florida for now, journalist, media, clean worker compared to me. There's a lot of words, but the reality is a very knowledgeable guy about this sport who cares about this sport, and for that brings great takes and brings a perspective that we need in general. His name is Joe Passero. What's going on, man?
Everything's been pretty all right. I'm glad to be back. This is I feel like we've been trying to get at this for a few weeks. I got sick. I was supposed to be on the show a few weeks ago, and I started coughing up a lung. So I'm glad to be back. I'm glad, it was a very interesting season, and I think there's a lot to talk about because after, seeing everything that the next gen had to offer in 2022, this was not quite the way I expected 2023 to shape up and shape out. So I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to talk about everything. There's a lot to get to, not just, Ryan Blaney winning the championship, the probably elephant of it all, but you got Kevin Harvick retiring and plenty more.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about the Cup Series champion, Ryan Blaney, the fact that Hendrick and Gibbs will get into their domination prior to Ryan Blaney's heater, the playoff format and the viability of it, having a one-race winner-take-all at one of the crappiest racetracks on the circuit, just because they have a cactus flag stand. Talking about Kevin Harvick and being the end of an era. Get into that. Disappointments, surprises from 2023, issues with the Gen 7 car tire, lack of horsepower. Just have to listen to the DJD to know what Redneck Jesus says, and the fact they don't listen to him is crazy to me. But both, and literally the interview that Dale Jr. and Kevin Harvick did, that whole podcast should tell you all you need to know about why or what needs to be done. Talk about William Byron, Martin Truex, and Dennis Hamlin, along with the other two guys that made the Final Four. We'll talk about the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Prior to that, we'll talk about NFL Week 11 after. We'll get into the South Carolina 400 late model race where Dale Jr., Josh Berry, and a cast of thousands in the late model realm drove this past weekend. We'll get in the roundup along with MotoGP, Moto2, with their championship getting to the end this coming weekend. WRC ending their season last weekend. Supercars at Adelaide to finish their 2023 campaign. And the final race for Shane Van Gisbergen in Supercars prior to moving to the United States. We'll talk about the F2 season finale, and also Leah Block, one of the probably most talented female drivers there is right now, the daughter of the late Ken Block, being signed to the Williams driver development and to be driving in F1 Academy, Cadillac registering as an engine manufacturer for Formula One. We'll get into what we're thankful for this motorsports year and preview Abu Dhabi, where Fish Lips will win, and who will finish behind him. Josh will talk about all things iRacing and gaming in his sim segment, and we'll close the deal. So yeah, let's get to this. The Vegas Grand Prix. The qualifying was compelling. Ferrari had the pace during the weekend early on. I mean, Carlos Sainz destroyed his chassis over a sewer grate or whatever. Esteban Ocon also did. So that ended FP1. They ran FP2, I think, at 4 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time, or something like that, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So if you were out at night roaming the streets, which my friend, one of my friends who's retired over to Las Vegas was doing, because he had his daughter had VIP access to McLaren's VIP, so he just decided to roam around the whole circuit, and he was just taking videos. So he got cool spots. Ferrari definitely had pace the whole entire weekend. Williams also, with Logan Sargent, put together one of his best weekends up till the race itself. Charles Leclerc was on the pole. Carlos Sainz fell just short of pole. So you would have thought that Ferrari could have gone off and won this race. Well, Fish Lips was right there. Carlos Sainz ended up having to take a 10 grid spot penalty, which is ridiculous. So Fish Lips ended up essentially moving up to second, et cetera, et cetera. Mercedes, George Russell was okay. Lewis Hamilton did not have an easy weekend at all. You had varying results. McLaren definitely had a bad one for the first time in a while. But in the race itself, Charles Leclerc got beat on the start by Verstappen. Verstappen cleared himself by just running Charles Leclerc into the grass or whatever, running him into the runoff area, and then it took them 30 laps or something, 20 laps for them to make a penalty, and by that point the penalty they gave him was a 5-second penalty, which is absolute bullshit. But then it's FIA for Red Bull, so anything that Max Verstappen does, he could literally murder somebody and they'd say, oh no, that's a 5-second penalty. But if Lewis Hamilton did it, he'd probably be arrested right on the spot. So talk about the hypocrisy of Formula One. Leclerc was up front. He probably had the fastest car. Sans Verstappen. Sergio Perez led in this race and actually made an overtake on the Las Vegas Strip back straightaway. It was a compelling race, but in the end, we know what happened. Fish Lips, the winner, over Leclerc and Perez. Esteban Ocon finished 4th, his best finish of the year. Stroll, somehow, I mean, for fuck's sake, it has to be Las Vegas that Lance Stroll got a top 5. Sainz from 12th finished 6th. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell had contact and issues with other people and salvaged 7th and 8th. I mean, you look at the from Stroll on to what is it? It was 10 seconds from Stroll to Oscar Piastri. I mean, you talk about 11 seconds between Ocon all the way to Piastri from 4th to 10th. So there was a compelling battle. And then the two guys that finished behind Verstappen were only 2 seconds behind him. So it's better than virtually most of the Grand Prix this year. Piastri salvaged what was a bad weekend for McLaren. Williams did nothing in the race. It was a disaster for them. Logan Sargent and Alexander Albon dropped like a rock. The Haas's were god awful. Lando Norris crashed on the second lap of the race. I think Hulkenberg and Sonoda in back-to-back laps had mechanical issues. Those were the 3 retirements. But, I mean, I guess, Josh, we can go on talk about it this way. What were your feelings about the weekend itself? What the racetrack provided? We know what the result was going to be, but to be fair, compared to most of the first 22 races of the season, it was actually interesting. There was actually compelling action up until like a few laps to go, which has literally not been the case most of the year.
Yeah, I mean the race itself was actually pretty good. Yeah, I mean I think I have to kind of agree with Verstappen's comments about pre-race and how there was a lot of spectacle and it was more of a show and not so much the sporting aspect. But I think also some of those comments are probably just kind of tied up into kind of the frustration that people felt from the first practice and the second practice being delayed there. So I do kind of agree on that aspect. But at the same time, when it came to race day, it was actually interesting. And I think one of the things why it made it interesting, and Verstappen actually pointed this out, is that they didn't have a sprint race. And so you weren't really able to tell who was good on tires, what tire conditions were going to be like for these drivers racing on a new circuit, compared to what we've seen in the past, especially with sprint races kind of showing their hand during the sprint race. You didn't have that here. And so that kind of made it a little bit more compelling in terms of decisions on when to, switch to a different compound, when go onto the hard tires or stay longer on, soft tires. So, that made it interesting. Of course, Verstappen, went way wide on the start. Should have been at least to give up the position there. But, I think he made that move knowing that they were going to give him a slap on the wrist for that. So, he didn't really have to take any penalty from that, of course. But still, even with that, they had an issue on their pit stop, and he fell back all the way back to 10th, while Leclerc held the lead for 13 laps, and he still had to work his way back up there. So, it would be more BS, I guess, like if he had led the whole way and kept leading without the penalty, or with a bad penalty. But at least he had to come back and earn the race from passing both Leclerc and Perez there. So at the very least, earned that one. And there's a lot of compelling racing. You saw overtaking on the Las Vegas Strip using the draft there as a means of passing. So that's pretty entertaining to watch. So I think the race itself pretty entertaining from start to finish. Especially the first yellow causing some of these drivers to go on to the harder compound. That's what enabled Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz to go there and take hard tires and then work their way slowly up through the field. And then they got another caution or yellow period that allowed them to go and get another pit stop for free, along with Verstappen. Then I think Leclerc, that was kind of a missed opportunity there to get on better tires. He was on 6-lap older tires than the rest of the field, and I think that definitely played a factor in him not being able to hold the lead. Although made a monster move there at the end using the draft on Sergio Perez on the Las Vegas Strip. So I mean this race was actually kind of good compared to what we've seen so far this year and almost all this year in Formula One. I mean, Verstappen won his 18th race in a row, but honestly, like, I don't really care about that, to be honest. I mean, at least, even if it was the same guy in the end winning, at least it was a little bit more interesting than, what we've seen lately here in Formula One.
And you can consider the fact that Ferrari figured out a way to leave Charles Leclerc out as probably a reason why he wasn't able to hold off Verstappen minus Verstappen's questionable driving tactics. But I mean, it's Ferrari. It's just you know they're going to do that. Sergio Perez's situation was he had way too much downforce on his car, so he was a sitting duck on a 1.5 mile straightaway. So that was the reason why he couldn't hold Leclerc off. But essentially, from the Las Vegas Strip straightaway up until turn 1, there's only that one Mickey Mouse chicane, and then it's essentially a straight. Now, I think instead of having a Mickey Mouse chicane, they could have probably made it like an actual 90-degree corner, and that might have made it a little bit more of a little better of a passing zone, because you'll be able to go and take the braking, maybe take the braking a little deeper. The section once they get past turn 1 where they bought that $500 million portion of the circuit where they basically have their complex, the first few corners. Once you get out of there, it's all in the streets and all the construction and crap. Yeah, it's part of the circuit's okay. Nothing of great significance. It's not as bad as Miami, but take it or leave it. I think for all the stuff that happened in practice in FP1, that it went sideways, and now there's a class action lawsuit because of all the fans that paid for tickets and all that. That's pretty funny. Not for them, but it's funny that Liberty's going to have to deal with it. But other than that, to be fair, it wasn't bad. I mean, considering what this season has been, considering what Formula One has basically been since Abu Dhabi 2021, I gotta say I really didn't have that much to be mad about, and that's something to be said. People are gonna hate it because it doesn't fit Formula One. Fishlips is gonna hate it because his whole entire life is racing and going and stealing other people's wives. But that's fine. I mean, it doesn't fit your narrative. Nobody really. It's like, who gives a fuck? You get paid $55 million. I really don't give a shit. And you have the best car, and nobody can beat you, and you're allowed to do whatever the hell you want. So go suck a dick. Like, really, I don't care what your opinion is. And his fans. I really don't care about his psychotic inbred fans either. So they can go and all knock each other off. It would be great. This society, he needs to go and have a massive shunt, and then maybe he might actually become humble. But I don't think that would even humble him. That's what makes it so. There was people that are so unlikable. For me, we've got NASCAR talking about Cup. I did not like Kyle Busch. I couldn't stand Kurt Busch. They're just people I just couldn't stand. Oh, Kyle Busch basically tried to eat it in an Xfinity crash, and then all of a sudden he started to have a conscience. I mean, essentially that's what happened. That, and he got caught cheating on Samantha or whatever. But that's a whole other, I think there was something going on there. To be fair, you look at the stuff that was going on. It's here. If it's hearsay, fine. It's my show, so it's our show.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree. That's wild.
Danny also took fingers up his butt, and he's a car owner in the sport, so that's a whole other thing. But and Denny is also unlikable. But there's a lot of guys that are unlikable, but things had to happen for them to finally figure it out. I don't think it's ever going to happen for Verstappen because he's coddled and he's protected. And that's a problem for Formula One in terms of popularity. When you talk about the fact that the American driver on the circuit, there's no real promotion of him. He's not a bad guy. So why would you promote him? But then I say that every day, every time we talk about IndyCar racing. So he wouldn't be any different if he was there. Logan had a chance this weekend, but on race day, it just went to hell for Williams. I don't know why or how, but It should have been a points day for both Williams drivers, but didn't come off. And Fishlips will win another race, and he'll be either overtake Sebastian Vettel in terms of wins, I think, with that, or somewhere around that. So he'll be second all time in victories after he's won 900 races in the last 2 years. So now he's going to be chasing Lewis. So that's the only person he can pass. Maybe Lewis can actually have, the Mercedes can actually make a good car for the first time in 4 years and get people that know how to pit a car. And then maybe he can stop this nonsense. All right, let's move on to more positive topics here. In terms of, so we'll talk about Ryan Blaney and his championship. Fact is, in the way that this format has become, you need to really get hot in the round of 8. You need to put yourself in a position to capitalize. He had put himself in a position over the season. He won the 600, but he was up front a lot. Inconsistencies, of course, kind of was there, but you look at Ford in general, they were not the prime manufacturer. They were by far the worst of the three. You had Hendrick and Gibbs dominating, which is, par for the course. But as per recent trends, Penske was preparing for the playoffs. It didn't work out for Joey Logano, but for Blaney, it was a different story. He was angling. He was one of the only Ford guys that kind of had a pulse through the year. Christopher Buescher, when he went on his summer run, had a pulse. Those were and Harvick, basically because of being Harvick. Those were the three guys that stood out. But in the playoffs itself, Buescher fell off. Harvick, unfortunately, didn't have enough pace to last, but Blaney did, and he stood up to all these Toyotas and Chevys. And even though Hendrick had a representation from two of the four guys in the final four were represented by Hendrick, and then Gibbs had one, and it wasn't Martin Truex, which we'll talk about later. Ryan Blaney faded it and was able to put a great car together, and they won the championship. He won the last 2 races of the season, which you got to give him credit. A guy who he's only had one multiple win season, I think, in his entire Cup career. I might be wrong. Maybe that's changed, but this is yeah. So
myself.
Yeah.
This was his second to 2020. Yeah. He had 3 wins this year. I believe was also 3. He got Martinsville, the 600, and
Talladega. Yeah.
And yeah, that's right. He didn't win Phoenix. My fault. That was Ross Chastain. Lest we forget
we
that.
We forgot it. Yeah, because NBC didn't even care.
NBC, yeah. I mean, and I speak of that. I actually got the racing, whatever. I got the Hale Mellon car. I saw it at Walmart, so I had to get it. So
they made 164 of those.
Yeah,
and you can buy them. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I gotta go to Walmart now.
I bought the actual one that the Lionel makes, but then they had it there, and they sold a Hale Mellon car. I'm like, oh crap! So I had to get it. But I'll put it to the floor. I mean, for me, as a Blaney guy, I was very happy to see it. He's the most popular driver in the sport. He's one of the only people that has a personality. He's a guy that Penske, people are going to say eventually, kind of like Joseph Newgarden, when was he going to win an IndyCar or win the Indy 500? He finally did. When was Ryan Blaney going to take that next step and become a champion so that he could basically be a side by side with Joey, knowing that Logano has been in the sport for a long time and is the veteran guy on that team, two-time series champion. So he's never really going anywhere. Shell Pennzoil's never going anywhere. So that's stable and whatever. They needed to have that second guy. Blaney had to do something. This was a year that I think it was kind of a make or break in a sense. I don't think they were ever going to get rid of him, but the reality of having a crew chief in Jonathan Hassler who wasn't afraid to take risks and also had a strategy this season about how to handle the situation that they had, which the Ford was not good, but they somehow or another gave themselves a chance when it counted to go and make something happen. I'll go to you first, Joe, and then Josh. Talking about Blaney and the viability of him as a champion, and what your thoughts of his season and what it means, I think, in the longer term for the NASCAR Cup Series.
Sure, yeah. I think, Ryan Blaney as a champion, obviously, and I think this probably get to something we get later on about the validity of the championships of this format itself. But, if you win the championship, you win the championship. Whether or not people like that or necessarily agree or disagree is irrelevant, because in the history books, you're the champion. He won it. He won it by the rules. That's how you do it. So I'm not really concerned about the validity of his title, especially given his playoff run. He did absolutely. He and Hassler and the whole number 12 Team Penske Ford team did absolutely everything they had to do just right to make it to the Final Four. And then, they kicked ass in the second half of the race. Looked for the first half that maybe it was going to be Byron. But they turned it up. They found out how to dial in the car, and they made it roll. So, as far as the validity goes, I'm not too concerned. And as far as the effect, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that a young driver with I don't really hear about people hating, like, Chase Elliott. People have in the past few years really gone either, you kind of really like him or you really hate him. Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin are drivers that there really aren't a lot of people that like. Even Kevin Harvick, of the past few years, I feel like people, up until whatever 2019, 2020, were kind of getting sick of his dominance. Very similar to the way I felt people had of Johnson, right? You just get sick of the same person winning over and over and over again. Ryan Blaney, it's interesting because he's not one of those people. He, as you mentioned, this is only his second multi-win season of his career. Still a relatively young career, but nonetheless only the second one. For him to put forth that effort, to be very liked by the fans, very well liked, probably the most well liked of the drivers. Not necessarily, I wouldn't go as far to say it's the most popular. I leave that to NMPA and their award to do. But for him to probably be one of the more or most positive figures seen from outside the sport, I think it's good that he won. I think it's good that someone young and positive won, because that's going to keep people in for a longer period of time. He's got a long career ahead of him, right? That's the benefit of winning the championship when you're young, is you have a lot of time for yourself to go out and win another one, and you know that. But for the fans, for the fan base itself, for the sport, it's also good because they know we can promote this guy for many, many years and hold him high, and he's going to be around for us. So quite honestly, for NASCAR, it's a win that he won the championship. They really, with this particular championship four, they really could have won with any of the four winning the championship, right? Because I think they said this is the youngest Final Four of the entire, since we've gone to this elimination grid format in 2014. This is the youngest average age for the Final Four. Larson being the only one who could have repeated, which once again, this championship format proves it's not quite designed to have a repeat champion. I think it's good all around. He had a really strong start to the season. And I feel like after that 600 win, he kind of faded. You faded that second half of the regular season. I don't remember hearing his name a lot, saying his name a lot, particularly thinking he was a threat. And I think I only had him going into, I don't know, my prediction somewhere. I think I may have had him eliminated after the second round, the round of 12, potentially the round of 8 eliminated, but I didn't have him. He was not someone I had on my radar to go to the Final Four, but they put together, like I said, the exact type of playoffs that you need to put together in order to move forward and to win the championship, which my feelings about the playoff format are different than my feelings about Blaney, so I'll get back into that a little bit later.
All good points.
Go ahead.
Gonna go and throw to you, but you're ready to go.
I was step ahead there, I guess, but no, I mean, I agree there. With Blaney, he's a likable guy. I don't think there's not really a lot of fans that have any set of dislike from him. He's got appearances on TV. He had a couple of guest appearances on some shows and stuff. So he's got kind of like all the makings of a driver that could be very popular and that could transcend. If they can figure out how to market him correctly, I guess that could potentially kind of be somewhat in mainstream culture, known in mainstream culture. But I mean, for what they were able to do, this year, before the playoffs, it was hard for me to picture Blaney coming out and winning or making it past probably the round of 12. Just Penske all year didn't really have that speed, and outside of the 600, they just didn't really have anything there. But they won the races when it mattered. They won Talladega, and then they probably should have won Homestead and locked up the spot there. But Chris Bell won that one. But he came out and won Martinsville, and then they started out at Phoenix. They didn't have a great car to start out with, but they worked on it throughout the race, and then it was just a battle of being the first driver out of the championship 4. Had to battle Ross Chastain there for the win, and then eventually he kind of let him go and let him win the race, and then he won the championship. So it was somebody that rose to the occasion, I guess, in this format. And we can talk about the validity of this format and everything, but at least he won in the paradigm of the rules and how it's supposed to work. So I mean, he did what he had to do, and I think any of the other drivers, I think they could have won. So it he wasn't a fluky driver really. It was not like Ricky Stenhouse going out and winning the championship. I mean, obviously you have to make it there, but it not fluky like that or anything. Daniel Hemrick in the Xfinity Series, his only career win turned out to be the Xfinity Series title, and you can make an argument there that maybe he's a guy that's not as deserving of the title as maybe some of the other Xfinity drivers. But I mean, you can make those arguments there, and in some of the lower divisions, of course, whether or not, like in Truck Series or in Xfinity, if the drivers that have won championships in this format, if they were the most deserving. But for who the drivers were in this field in the Cup Series, and I think this year wasn't a one that you could argue against really. Kyle Larson, he won a couple of races during the year. He locked his way in at Las Vegas. So I mean, on speed, he had in the beginning of the year, Kyle Larson had a lot of speed, but they had bad luck or he made mistakes, and then they had a didn't have a really good summer, and then they were okay for most part of the chase, and then they made their way in the round of 8 to get into the final four. So he's probably the one that could have been questionable, and the other guys, Chris Bell and Byron, I think had more leverage, I guess, as far as who was the most deserving of a championship. But it's really hard to argue against any of them. So yeah, I think Blaney now he has to go and back this title up, which is going to be hard because Ford, they're going to have to make a lot of new gains here this offseason. They're switching over to the Dark Horse for their make of the Mustang in 2024. So it's going to be interesting to see how that car lines up against Chevy and Toyota, and if it brings them improvements where they need it to be able to challenge more on a consistent basis for both Team Penske and now with RFK coming into being more of a contender now. So I think those two teams are going to lead the way for Ford throughout the year and next year, and we'll see if they can challenge Penske or challenge Gibbs and Hendrick on a week-to-week basis more consistently.
Yeah, I with Blaney being able to get the heater when it counted, that's what the format asks for. So in that sense, he did what he had to do. We can talk in hypotheticals of 36 race championship or this, that, the Winston Cup format or other chase formats, but this is what it is, like you guys said, and he did the job, and he has been working towards this for his whole career, and to go and do it with his whole family there and to kind of meet the potential that has always been there. Brad Keselowski saw it a long time ago, a decade ago, and it proves once again, like the two best talent evaluators I think in NASCAR are Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Brad Keselowski. I mean, I guess Kyle Busch to an extent too, but that was almost by proxy because he was running the Toyota truck program forever. So those are really the three evaluators that you look at their driver lineups over time, who's ended up with championship drivers and success. So for Blaney, I think the pressure definitely is, there's a multifaceted way handling being the champion, managing the fact that Ford is going to a new body. I think the new body style, which is essentially the front and rear clip, will it race better on everything outside of the short tracks or whatever? That's where the Ford team seem to be at their best, and super speedways. Other tracks, which is the majority of the schedule, struggled at. That'll be a question similar to supercars, where the Fords have been absolutely nowhere for virtually the entire year. They weren't even allowed to make a change before the biggest race of the year. So that was, and they haven't had competitiveness, and there's supposed to be a balance of performance in that series. So we'll see what happens with the Dark Horse Mustang. I think the next thing is we'll get into the other three drivers that made the Final Four. Kyle Larson trying to get his second title, busy with running the High Limit Series with his brother-in-law, Brad Sweet, who's now a 5-time defending World of Outlaws champion, but isn't going to defend his championship. So he's busy trying to be the savior of dirt sprint car racing. But when he isn't doing that, he's still competitive. You look at Christopher Bell, who, looking at Gibbs racing over the season, Martin Truex won the regular season title. Denny Hamlin was a factor for most of the season. But when it counted and when you had to be clutch, it was Christopher Bell for a second year in a row with Adam Stevens clutching up in the playoffs with that big win at Homestead and putting himself in position to get to the Final Four for a second year in a row. Adam Stevens trying to prove that it wasn't just about him and Kyle Busch. He can win with somebody else. And then William Byron, which, I mean, I'll throw to you, Josh, first with William Byron, and then you can kind of talk about all three drivers however you want to. Byron, I think, is the one person that definitely will feel a certain way, probably feel aggrieved, and like I had my career year. Hendrick was one of the two dominant teams. He won more races than anybody. The potential for all these years, being a guy, being a sim guy like yourself, and having to utilize that. Of course, then he has all that money with his dad and stuff, but he wasn't initially racing in go-karts, and he didn't have it initially. He had to use the iRacing and other platforms to start his career. And he finally, after however many years in the Cup Series and also with Rudy Fugle, who he's had the most success with, put it together. But when it came down to it at Phoenix, at a track which he has won at before, he wasn't able to get the job done in the second half of that race. And I think if there's one person that really is going to be like, what if, it was William Byron after this season.
I mean, for William Byron, the last race at Phoenix was almost kind of a mirror of the first race here at the beginning in the year at March at Phoenix, where that race, he kind of dominated the first portion of the race, and then Kyle Larson took over from him. But then they had a late caution, and then he was able to get back onto the lead and win that race. But then here, kind of the same deal, led the initial portion of this race in the championship. But then, after the middle of stage 2, they kind of faded back, and they weren't able to get back up there to pass Ryan Blaney at the end. So I think, from that end, yeah, he definitely missed an opportunity there to win the title. He was still in it, all the way until the end. But, when William Byron and Kyle Larson and Ryan Blaney all kind of there in the same vicinity, he wasn't able to make that move up there. He just didn't have the handling late in the race compared to what Ryan Blaney was able to do there. So from that aspect, yeah, very disappointing for him to come close to have that opportunity, not win the title. But if we go back to the old format, of course, William Byron had the most successful season in terms of wins, top 10s and top 5s, had the most poles this year. So he was definitely somebody that should have won it, on any other format, and even the old format before the elimination playoffs and all this stuff. You could make an argument that he might have won in that format as well. So, yeah, I mean, is he deserving of it, or could he have been deserving? Yes, but at the end of the day, they just weren't able to close and win the race that mattered. So, he had the pace throughout the year. Somehow Denny Hamlin was able to have the foresight to say that he was going to be one of the drivers that had a good year, along with Dale Jr. saying that Blaney would win the championship. So somehow those guys were able to figure it out and tell you who was going to be good throughout the year and who would win the title. So, that's interesting there. But, it comes up short, so we'll have to see how he responds next year for, Hendrick. I'm sure they'll go back and figure out how to be better at Phoenix, so that that when they get there, they'll have a chance and to be able to compete and not just kind of struggle in the second half of that race. But Larson, of course, kind of brought him up as well, but he he had a chance there late in the going to be able to get around Ryan Blaney, but just wasn't able to make the pass against him, and ended up falling back. So I mean, he probably didn't have the best race in the championship finale, but he kind of like in 2021, his pit crew kind of got him out in a position where he was able to drive and be able to fight Ryan Blaney there at the end. But again, at the end of the day, it ended up being Ryan Blaney. And of course, I think the one guy that never even had a chance in this one, Chris Bell, got eliminated very early on in the going. He was a guy throughout the year that I think kind of had streaks where he was really good, but then also had times where he wasn't quite as good. But he was at least somewhat more consistent. He had the most poles in the series, and it had 19 top 10s, 10 top 5s, and one Bristol Dirt, and then one later on in the year with Homesteads. So he's another guy that could have had an opportunity, but we never really got to find out what kind of car he had capable of, with the brake issues that he had that led to his early exit, which in this format, is kind of rare to see a driver fall out so early in the race. But, from there on ended up being a three-man race for the title. So I think, he's one guy that, could he have made a move at the end to possibly be there? Possible. Denny Hamlin was up there at the end of that race on the final restart, or what ended up being the final restart. So there's always that possibility that if they had survived all the way to the end, could have had a chance. But like I said earlier, it's hard to argue against any of these guys winning or having had the ability to win the titles. So we'll just have to see next year in this format if one of those guys or even any of those guys have a year that can show that they can get back to this position and have another shot at winning the title.
Yeah, I mean, that all good points in terms of Byron and the guys that were in the championship for, and it speaks to one, just the season itself, and the fact that those two teams were the dominant two teams in the series, which, let's be honest, going back, I don't know how many decades now, it's been a thing where, at least a decade and a half, it's probably been Hendrick and Gibbs. Mainly, it's been 15 years since they started with, or 16 years since they started with Toyota. Gibbs has been a factor. Hendrick has been there basically my whole entire fandom. But in this case, this year with this car, Hendrick, through however many things, of course, having the Garage 56 car, other avenues that they're able to manipulate, having this car, they had the advantage. I mean, they had 4 cars. 2 of them won a lot of races, and then 2 of them were nowhere. In terms of Gibbs, 3 of the 4 drivers won races, and the 4th guy was the rookie of the year and almost made the playoff. And so, and that's with he was the only Toyota that Keebler was the only one that didn't make the playoffs for Toyota, which shows how good the Toyotas actually were. But he's a rookie. You can kind of forgive that. But I figured, Joe, what were your thoughts on Hendrick and Gibbs this year, considering 75% of the Final Four was represented by them? The guy that was the closest to making the Final Four, or just short of the Final Four, was Dennis Hamlin, another Toyota. So those were the 2 top teams. They ended up holding the bag for Penske, or for Ryan Blaney, but the way this season went, I don't think we would have thought for most of the year it would have been one of those 2 teams.
Yeah, with Hendrick and Gibbs again, I'm left scratching my head a little bit. I guess last year wasn't maybe as surprising, with Logano winning the championship, because last year was a very different story, despite having, Hendrick really, for the most part, as an organization, dominate the season last year. Whereas Gibbs really seemed to struggle last year and Penske rose up. I feel like we're in a little bit of a similar but different situation. This year, Hendrick was pretty 50-50. Like you mentioned, William Byron had 6 wins by the end of the year. Kyle Larson had 4. I believe they were the winningest organization just for those 2 drivers winning those 10 races. But on the other end of the spectrum, their other 2 drivers really struggled. Alex Bowman sat out, missed a few weeks due to injury. He didn't win any races, didn't make the playoffs. Chase Elliott, similarly, had to sit out due to an injury for a few weeks, then got suspended for another race, missed 7 weeks, didn't make the playoffs, had no wins. And particularly for Chase Elliott, I think it's more notable because ever since he started winning, he has not had not only a season where he hasn't won, but a season where he hasn't won multiple races. So to drop off to the other extreme and not win anything, not even make the playoffs, when he's the sport's most popular driver as voted by the fans, that's a pretty big difference. So there's Hendrick for you wrapped up in a nutshell. Joe Gibbs, on the other hand, I was more impressed with this season than I was last year. Hamlin won a handful of races. You had Bell make the final 4, and despite it only being 2 wins, again he showed up at the end of the season. And you had Truex win the Clash, the regular season championship, put together a really impressive first 26 races. I don't have much to say about his playoffs. But even Ty Gibbs for being a rookie and for being his first year in the Cup Series, he was up at the front when he crashed out of the Daytona race. He could have made the playoffs on points. He was one of, I believe, only 3 drivers at the end of the regular season that actually could have made the playoffs on points that wasn't already locked in. He had opportunities to win. He had a very good car. I remember sitting at the grandstands at Dover earlier in this season, thinking to myself, like, oh my God, Ty Gibbs might win his first race today, only to get beat out by his teammate Truex. But, to me, it was much more impressive what JGR put together as a collective organization this season. Hendrick, while impressive, the fact that just the gap of performance between their half of their organization just really kind of left me wondering, what can they do differently over the offseason? Because they've put all 4 of their drivers, all 4 of their teams, all 4 of their cars into victory lane for the past 2 years up to this point. And then obviously it looked like they seemed like they were going to start off pretty hot. Alex Bowman won the pole again for the Daytona 500 this year, I believe. And, it just absolutely shattered from there. It was all downhill from there, at least for Alex Bowman and Chase Elliott, who started the year, I believe, dead last. I believe he finished last or next to last in the Daytona 500. When you look at those 2 organizations, right, just as a whole, the organization's not a particular driver, and then you compare that to Penske, who has 3 drivers, so 1 less than each of the other organizations, out of all fairness, but who only won 2 of the 26 regular season races with 2 drivers. Logano won in Atlanta. Blaney won at the 600, and that was it. Penske was not seen again in victory lane until the playoffs, late in the playoffs, I might add, at Talladega. When you think about that, right, they put 2 drivers in the playoffs of their 3. They're 2 winning drivers from the regular season. One of them day 8 in the first round. They got kicked out. And then you had Blaney quietly rise to the top. I do feel it was very similar. Penske, again, very prepared for this last stint of the year when you compare everything. So, yeah, the year, comparatively speaking, was not as impressive as your other 2 organizations. That really did. They were the dominant organizations yet again of the season. But at the end of the day, despite holding a 75% between those 2 organizations rate of the potential to win the championship come up short because they just don't have it in the end.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier with the format having to be hot at the right time. I think it also speaks to the way that Penske has responded the last couple of years with their drivers and Logano, being that he knows what he's had to do, and now with Blaney figuring it out and taking that next step in his career. Hendrick is definitely going to want to. We're not that far past when winning 2 consecutive championships and Larson literally dominating the whole entire series. Elliott going out there and starting tailback and going all the way to the front and winning his championship. It's not that far away, but we'll see with how the parity is with this car, how that fits, and how the two guys in Elliott and Bowman respond after off years. For Truex, the performance in the playoffs was an abomination, and is this the start of the end, or was it just a 10 race aberration or whatever that the bottom fell out on him? It looks like you got something, Joe.
Oh, yeah, I could go sound off on this. I had a conversation with my dad about it, and he just had to listen to me for like 40 minutes, so sorry, Dad. But, man, I think I'm probably going to cover 2 topics here, not only the demise of Martin Truex Jr. in this year's NASCAR Cup Series playoffs, but the format itself. I think, this is going to be a semi-transitional point. Man, I don't know if in this era of the elimination grid format, I don't ever know that we've seen such a hard fall off where the person who is first at the end of the 26th race just absolutely falls on their face. And the fact he got, right, I think 1 top 10 to show for his entire playoffs, a single top 10, more notably, a blown engine, a blown tire that ended his day fairly early at Kansas. And just crappy performance, really. I mean, they were not there. Like, it shocked me how well they ran until they got their penalty at Martinsville, because I was thinking to myself, like, oh my God, they have just fallen off of a cliff, and they still might make the championship 4, right? I mean, quite honestly, with how close he was, I think it was about 3 or 4 points that kept him in the first round, moving on to the second. And then every time he would reset right back to the top. Tied for the top with Byron, not in the round of 8, because Byron had gotten the win to propel himself solely to first. But I mean, you talking every single round, Martin Truex Jr. was first or second in the reseeding, and every single round we were talking about by a mere few points that could be counted on a set of hands, sometimes one hand, was all that was keeping him in the playoffs. That's how disappointing his performance was. I think 2 or 3 DNFs, at least 2, because he blew a motor at Miami and crashed out at Kansas. I mean, just to me, it was such a huge fall off, such a big difference, that's really what makes you question the legitimacy of it's not the format itself that makes you question the legitimacy of the format. You need to see something of that format, and this is what we saw. We saw the regular season champion, theoretically the most dominant driver of the first 26 races, fall apart in the last 10. And somehow, some way, he was still rewarded and continued to move forward. This is my take on this. I like this format. Don't get me wrong. I love the elimination style. I love the drama it creates. It creates a lot of entertainment. It keeps fans invested, whether or not they realize that or not. It keeps them invested because they know they have a chance to move forward, right? With the old style, when when Tony Stewart and Carl Edwards, what was that, 13 years ago, 12 years ago, when they fought for that championship, don't get me wrong, entertaining, yes. But if you were a fan of Ryan Newman, you knew you weren't going to win that championship probably after the third race, right? So about the time the first elimination occurs. However, that being said, by the end of the fourth race, you probably could have picked out one of three drivers that year to win the championship. This championship format keeps you guessing. That's the benefit of it to the fans and to NASCAR because it keeps the fans invested. You don't know, right? It holds you close. The problem that I have with it is absolutely ridiculous to allow someone to move forward through the playoffs when they can't score a top 10 until week 5 or 6 of a 10 race playoff. That's unacceptable to me. That the performance put forth by that 19 team was terrible, horrible, utterly disgusting. However you want to say it, it was bad. To me, I don't agree with let me rephrase it. I do agree with Steve O'Donnell. He addressed the media in this very State of the Union fashion, the state of NASCAR, if you will. And he was absolutely just unequivocal that this is the best playoff format ever. It's perfect, blah, blah, blah. I think it's a great playoff format. It's not perfect by any means. And any organization, I know the FIA, for as much as I don't really follow Formula One, I know the FIA has problems doing this. I think larger organizations, corporate organizations, all have this problem because we live in an era where everybody's critical, so the organization doesn't feel like they can criticize themselves. Everything's perfect. I don't believe that to be true, and I think that's a really bad mentality if you think everything's perfect, because that means there's no room for improvement. And I can tell you that many fans would disagree. I disagree. To me, the regular season champion, yes, should be rewarded. They put forth a fantastic regular season. I think Truex was amazing. He probably should have won more races, definitely at least one more that I can think of off the top of my head in the regular season. But, you know, to me, just like all other sports, right? Think about in baseball, when you go into the postseason, if you are one of the top teams, you're getting a 1-round bye. In football, if you're getting a bye, it only lasts for 1 round. All other major playoffs, a team that gets a bye, it's a waiver for 1 round, and you still have to punch it and earn it after that. To me, that was what made 2014, 15, and 16 in particular such great playoffs. The drivers that were rewarded for the first round did make the second round, right? But from there, they still had to go forward and earn it. Truex did not earn it. James Small did not earn it. The entire 19 team, they did not earn it. They should not have even had a sniff as close of the championship 4 as they got. There needs to be some restructuring. I'm not necessarily saying they need to go back and do a whole brand new thing. I still like the elimination format for a number of reasons, but there are things that they can take, things they've already done, right? Like, we're just going to wipe the slate clean after the second round. Everyone's reset to the same number. Have at it. I think that's a great concept moving forward, and I think that way you're going to get more legitimate champions in the eyes of fans moving forward with this format, right? If Martin Truex Jr. had won the championship this year, right? Let's say he sneaks by, he, finishes second or third at Martinsville, basically what he needed to do, and then goes out, wins at Phoenix. I would have, and I'm sure many people would have, been pissed. Like, how do you let someone perform that poorly in this playoffs that, in theory, is about rewarding high performance, near perfection performance? How do you let someone who scored in that scenario 3 top 10s in 7 races, probably the next to the worst of the playoff drivers, how do you reward them with the championship? Honestly. No matter how good the regular season was. So to me, that's my problem. I also don't, and this is a whole nother topic, I won't get too much into this, but the playoffs next year, are going to shape up to be even worse because of the selection of tracks NASCAR has brought forward into the first 2 rounds. You have an opportunity to make an even further argument that whoever wins the championship could have been a bit of a fluke. That's the end of my rant for here, because that's a different rant. But my God, just the fact that they think the playoff format is perfect, I think speaks to where they are as a sport. And I think when fans, say things, I know sometimes fans go off a little too much, but I think there's something to be learned from the fans if NASCAR is willing to put forth the effort to listen.
Yeah, all good points there, Joe. I mean, very valid in terms of Truex. In terms of the regular season champion over the years, they've usually lasted and actually performed. This is a first in maybe period where the regular season champion or the driver that started the playoffs in the number 1 seed basically, I think for probably Smoke in 09 dropped anchor in the playoffs, but that was because he ran out of gas. I mean, or something happened to him. I think 2010 he ran out of gas in New Hampshire. 2009 they just were not in a good place and they dropped off, and Jimmy went and did his thing. And I'm thinking of who was that the year that was him and Mark Martin? Was it
2009
Jimmy and Mark
Jimmy,
Martin?
Mark Martin, and Jeff Gordon.
Yeah, that was and 08 was Jimmy with Carl Edwards. Okay. Yeah, so I mean that I think was the last time that I can really think of a championship, like the person who was leading the points was not basically kind of disappeared. Because I think in 13, Matt Kenseth went all the way to the end. 20
Kyle Busch in 2008, where he was the best guy throughout
Kyle
the first
Busch,
26, and then completely fell off the first 3 races in the chase, and then he wasn't heard from again that season.
Yeah, but so saying the most recent one that I can think of was like 09,
right.
08 was another example. Before we went to this format, Josh, what did you want to chime in regards to Truex? And I guess we can talk about it in terms of the format. What are your thoughts on this format, or any changes you would like to see, since they believe it's the perfect format?
I mean, to kind of piggyback off of what Joe's point with Truex, how Truex kind of just backdoored his way all the way through to the round of 8 there. To kind of understand how he even got to that point, you go back to the first 3 years of the playoffs where, 2014, 2015, we had guys get eliminated in the round of 8, the round of 12 that had fairly good seasons. Remember, Logano got junked by Kenseth, and that basically ended his season in 2015. And then 2016, that was kind of when we started to see, like, I think a lot of people started paying more attention to the flaws of the system. And then the elimination race, they moved Talladega to the race before the elimination race in the round of 12, and Kansas, Martin Truex Jr. and Brad Keselowski were 2 of the best drivers that year throughout the year. But then they both had blown engines, I think. And I think a lot of people called it as anticlimactic that 2 of the best drivers in the series that year got eliminated and weren't going to have anything to show for it. And I think that was like part of the reason why they added in the playoff point format with stage racing to be able to reward guys for, if you scored stage points, but then the final stage at some point you get taken out with blown engine, wreck, or whatever, you just fall off completely. You get credit for the first half or first 2/3, however, of the stage or of the race, to get credit for that, and that kind of inflates your value of your race. That's why a couple years ago, back in 2020, Ryan Blaney got up to like third in the standings in the middle of the year, but overall his season that year was fairly weak. He just was able to stack up so many stage points to get himself up to that point in the middle of 2020. But now Truex had all these playoff points that he stacked up throughout the year in 2023, and then he was able to use that to backdoor his way into the playoffs, and to kind of illustrate how good he was. I mean, the last 2 races before he got eliminated, could have had a chance to not get eliminated or possibly win. At Homestead, Joe, you were there. You saw Truex lead in the first part of that race, and then had a blown motor, and then could have easily won or had a better finish at Martinsville. And they were leading at one point, but then they didn't end up winning that race. So they could have easily had a chance. Danny Hamlin talked about on his show, he was just like, any week Martin Truex could come out and win and be right back in it. And I mean, that speaks to the flaws of the format, I think, with the way this is set up. I mean, I was just thinking of this like in my head just now, like you could have the stage points and the playoff points that you collect from the first part of the year, from the first 26 races, that helps you seed for the first round, and then any additional stage points and playoff points that you earn only count towards the final round. So whatever you earn for the first 26 races don't count don't carry over, but whatever you earn within those three races would eventually carry over to the final round. So it's just, the more that they change it, just shows how convoluted it really is. And I mean, going back to what I was saying earlier with how they developed this system, I mean, it was kind of a apology, I guess, in a way to make sure we didn't have shock eliminations. Anyway, we still see shock eliminations, but the sense of where I feel like the first 2 years were extremely dramatic. We had a lot of drama, and we had guys fighting each other on a week-to-week basis. We saw what happened with Logano, like I mentioned earlier. So, we haven't had that type of, drama in this playoff system, or at least in that type of way. I mean, we've seen it since then, but, the, I guess, toxicity didn't really come back until, last year with all the stuff that happened throughout that year. And then Ross Chastain getting in with the wall right there, which you had the diecast of. So, I mean, it just shows that the more that they tinker with the system to try to make it more evened out, the more rules that you have to implement to show who's the most deserving champion and everything. And that at some point they have to simplify it in a way that makes sense to most people. When I was at the Coke Zero 400 in Daytona, I went with 2 friends that had never been to NASCAR. They don't really follow NASCAR. I mean, they started kind of paying attention more when I told them about this show and all that, even though they're been lifelong friends for the most part. But I had to explain to them how all this works. And, I had wrote up a Google Doc explaining why that race was so important, why it was so important for Martin Truex versus Denny Hamlin in the regular season title. And then, on the car ride back to the Buc-ee's there, where I dropped my car, like waiting for traffic to fall out, like, and he explained like, okay, like why this whole thing playoff format's supposed to work. Why did they crown Truex the champion? And Truex isn't really the champion. He's just like, here's like a participation trophy for being the best guy out of the first 26. So you get credit for that. And everything, because even before 2017 or whenever they started doing the whole regular season champion thing, it didn't really make any sense to crown the guy after the first 26. In the regular season and in football, baseball, basketball, whatever, because now we're gonna compare playoffs here. They don't give the New England Patriots the award for being the number one seed, right? They're the number one seed. They get it. Their reward for that is having the bye week or whatever. And if they get eliminated, then they get eliminated. They don't get any trophy other than being division champions. Which that's a crown. They all make T-shirts and everything, but they don't have like a trophy presentation post race or post event like they do with NASCAR. They have a whole ass trophy that they give to the regular season champion for it. And I mean, Kyle Larson has one, Truex has one, so and I think Chase Elliott has one, so it's pretty interesting to see how they reward it. And I think they've got to be able to simplify it in a way that makes it easy for new people to understand, and then also in a way that the old guard, hardcore fans can still agree with, and not have to get in the weeds of in these type of discussions. And one final point on this, I'm kind of one of the reasons why I've never really liked the playoff format is because, well, we don't really see any other major racing series adopt this format. We don't see IndyCar adopting it. We don't see this in IMSA. We don't see this in F1. I mean, they've all had kind of their different ways of awarding the championship that have, seemed goofy over the years, with double points in the Indy 500 and last race season. I think F1 had their own version of double points for a few years there. I don't know about IMSA, but we had that. I mean, but then I was reading an article that Matt Weaver put out, I think in the aftermath of the championship, and talking about who was the formats and all that stuff, and he did demonstrate that a lot of, I guess, more regional tours, the Hooters Pro Cup Series, which is now the Cars Tour, I think that's where kind of the chase evolved from, or kind of came from. And then there's other series that are more regional that have adopted a playoff format. And I think even in NHRA, you might have to back me up on this, Phil, because I'm not really as keen to the NHRA like you, but I think they have something that kind of resembles a playoff. So maybe there are other series that are starting to adopt it, but then I also just look at the whole global realm of motorsport, and NASCAR. They obviously they are the major series here in America in stock car racing, and I think there's got to be a better way of determining the champion. And I think the old way of most points throughout the end of the throughout the whole season, or even most points throughout a certain subset of races in 10 races, I think as a better way than cutting off people after three races, and then having one race where you could theoretically win 35 out of 36 races, lead 311 out of 312 laps, and then have a flat tire, and then whoever's in second ends up winning the race, so in the championship. So I don't think that's how motorsports titles deserve to or should be determined. So I think there's definitely a different way that they could be doing it.
All valid points. I mean, in terms of what you were saying, Josh, in terms of the NHRA, they've had the countdown format in the NHRA in some way, shape, or form for a good while. They made that because of the way the points were, where there would be a dominant driver that would get out to a huge lead. And if they didn't have a reset, basically at the U.S. Nationals in September, which is similar to what NASCAR has, then the championship would have basically been over and nobody would have given a crap. It has allowed for champions. It's allowed for some dramatic finishes at Pomona. And we saw that especially in Top Fuel and Funny Car with Doug Coletta finally winning his first Top Fuel title and Matt Hagan winning his fourth Funny Car title. They weren't theoretically, I mean, Matt Hagan was one of the main three guys in the Funny Car class. Coletta was good, but he wasn't as good as some of the other drivers. during the regular season. But he was able to utilize the reset and get a good playoff, put himself in position, consistency. But that's over a few races. They don't do a reset after the initial reset. It was more similar to the original Chase format, which was a 10-race playoff. I mean, I think for me, I don't like 16 drivers. I don't. When you have 36 chartered cars and you basically have half the cars in the playoffs. I know that in all major ball sports, they're trying to expand their playoffs, have more teams. It's convoluted. I think 8, 10, and 12 should be the way. I think 8 trucks, when you consider how many races they have, 10 Xfinity cars, and 12 Cup cars, makes sense. Whether you want to give the top 6 or top 8 in points, and then you want to open it up to like winners, which is similar to the previous format where the top 2 guys that won outside of the top 10 made it. We can kind of finagle that. The playoff point thing and having stage points, okay, fine. You started at once, so you start at the first race. Okay, this is what it is. You don't have a reset anymore until you get to the final, whatever. I guess it would, for me, it would be a 3-race championship run or something like that, where you would have, I would say, let's just say 6 drivers. So then you get more of the more people get a bite of the apple, so to speak. More teams, more sponsors, and it's a 3-race playoff where you have a reset. Okay, fine. You've earned these points over the first 7 races or however many races, the first 9 races, because I think 36 races you could do 24 regular season, 12 in the playoff. You can go and do 8 races and then do a 4-race championship. And then at the end of the day, it's more like the regular season. You have a reset, you're competing. There would be more incentive for those guys to race for the stages. There would be more incentive for the guys to get those points. And I mean, the playoff points don't matter at that point. It would just be stage points and earning as many points as you can. If you win a race, that gives you an advantage, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's kind of a raw idea in my head, but it's not a perfect format. The IndyCar, with how they have a weird overall point system, but the fact is 2023 was the first year since 2007 since 2006 that the championship didn't come down to the final race of the season. And this has essentially been the same 4-point format that they've had. Yeah, they had double points at Indy. They had double points. They had a final race with double points. But the championship came down to the last race of the season. It wasn't a 1-race playoff either. You look at Formula One, it almost played a role in 2014 where Lewis was going against Lewis Hamilton versus Nico Rosberg, which is the Mercedes drivers going against each other. If Nico Rosberg had won and then something crazy had happened to Lewis Hamilton, he would have lost the world championship. In the end, Lewis Hamilton won the race. It didn't matter. I think there was in 2016, it was the other way around. They were trying to make Lewis not hold up the pack and stuff, but that wasn't a double points deal. That was just because him and Nico hated each other. That was just competition. In the end, the format they have is what it is. We've seen some interesting champions. There's only been 2 repeat champions since Jimmy Johnson's 5-bagger. from 2006 to 2010, but that was a different chase format. Since this format's come along, it's only been Kyle Busch and Joey Logano, and we can really get into semantics about both of those guys and at least one of those championships. So it's hard to repeat, which I guess makes it, more of a interesting. But trying to explain it to the lay person, no, it's not good. The format that they had in 2011 was much easier to explain than what they have right now. And it's interesting. We're recording on the anniversary, the 12-year anniversary of Tony winning at Homestead to defeat Carl Edwards, win his fifth race, and win the championship, which was probably the motivation for why we have the format we have right now. So it's something we're always. I don't think we're ever going to have a scenario, especially with the people that they have making the decisions, and SOD and Steve Phelps, that is going to really be valid. They're messing with the schedule too, and the races in the playoff, which I also think is not great. So that like Joe said, so I mean, we're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. We'll change it up here. We talked about the Final Four. We talked about the playoff format. Let's talk about Kevin Harvick. He retires 60 wins in his Cup career. Did have a couple of chances late in the season to win a final race in his win a race in his final year. It has been kind of the trend where the drivers on their in their final year haven't really been able to win. Basically, Kevin had that solid performance last year. He had a couple of wins in the summer, and he kind of looked like the old Kevin Harvick. That was really the end. But Kevin Harvick was always a factor, and he left RCR, and they basically became irrelevant until a couple of years ago when they had Tyler Reddick. And then Kyle Busch didn't have any money, so he just dropped in RC's lap. But they've been irrelevant since Kevin Harvick had left. Stewart-Haas Racing basically had relevance because of Kevin Harvick. Budweiser and Busch hitched their wagon to him in 2010 and stayed with him until a couple of weeks ago. It shows his viability when you consider what Kevin Harvick was taking over for the late Dale Earnhardt, and he had GM Goodwrench on the car for the first 6 years of his career. Then the Shell Pennzoil deal came together, and he had that sponsorship for a while, a good, I think, 6 years there before they moved on to Penske or thereabouts. And then he had Budweiser and Busch. It speaks to the businessman that Kevin Harvick was. And he ran a team. Him and his wife ran a team for many years and was a successful organization, especially on the Truck Series. But Kevin Harvick's meaning to the sport is bigger than just being Kevin Harvick, the driver. Now he's going from being a driver, and he's going to be the lead analyst at Fox, which is something, considering the way things circle around. And you retire, and to me, in a lot of ways, it has similarities to Dale Jarrett, because Dale Jarrett wasn't really competitive for the last few years of his career, but it was something that people thought was going to be really cool to see him get in the booth because of how his legendary father and how great he was. And take it or leave it, whatever your opinion, Dale Jarrett has been as advertised in terms of his being an analyst. Rusty Wallace, I mean, he wasn't good on TV. He's been all right on radio, and he kind of figured it out by that point. But you think about some of these drivers. Kevin Harvick has been a outspoken guy. He's been someone that'll tell it like it is, and you need that in the booth. And whatever, God loved DW. He wasn't that guy. He was just as much of an ass kisser as he was somebody who would go and kind of say, he said stuff when he was on TNN, when he was doing it part-time. Once he got in there with Fox, it was kind of protected. He was good for the first contract and then dropped off the face of the planet. Kevin Harvick, I think he is in a position kind of like Dale Jr., where he comes from the history side of things. He comes from the West Coast with all the great racers that came from there. He had to sleep on Ron Hornaday's couch before he became who he was. And now you think about, I was reading about Landon Lewis on social media earlier today, and he was working for KHI as part of their program this weekend. And he's another guy who comes from the Hornaday development program. So it's always like this circle: Kevin Harvick, Ron Hornaday, and the next generation. There's a responsibility for Kevin Harvick, and in the flip side, that's a big void in this sport. We have lost one of the last true voices in this sport. And it's been the trend since 2015 with Jeffy calling it quits. Tony wanted to quit. They told him not to. He stuck around another year. Somehow or another won one race, got hurt, missed races, but he won one more race. You had Dale Jr. and Matt Kenseth retire the next year. In last year, Kurt Busch had to retire because of concussion symptoms. I mean, I may be forgetting someone in between that, but you look at all those guys, and those guys all were in and around from 1998 through 2004, which was basically 2000, the start of the peak period of NASCAR and the growth period. And then when Winston Cup ended and Sprint came into the sport, and that changed things too. And where the chase format came along, they were in that time. Those were all the young guys. And now they're all gone. And we look at this sport next year. I'll give it to you guys. Josh, I'll start with you. For Kevin Harvick, what has he meant to you? Because for you guys, I know he's been there the whole time, or virtually the whole time you've watched. I remember Kevin Harvick going back to his Southwest Tour days and driving for Brad Doherty in the Truck Series even. So it's crazy to see what he has become and what he has done and what he has meant, not just as a driver, but in general, all the things he has done in NASCAR, coming from humble beginnings and from California and sleeping on Ron Hornaday's couch to being a champion and being a championship winning owner. It's a big void we have now in this sport.
I mean, yeah, for me, I think honestly, for me, at the end of the day, is someone that turned out to be a really dominant driver. I mean, when I was, a kid watching the first few years, wasn't that dominant, but managed to, have clutch wins like the 2007 Daytona 500, and then, he didn't win until Talladega in 2010 in the Cup Series, and just how he was able to get close snail baiting finishes and somehow come from nowhere to win races is kind of what impressed me about him in the middle of his career. And then he Dale Jr. ran out of gas at Charlotte, and who won that race? Kevin Harvick did in the Coke 600. So he always had those types of wins where came from nowhere, but then he went to Stuart Haas, so he just turned it up another level, and went and won the championship in 2014. Had a really good year in 2015 and 16. 2018, 2019, 2020, just went into a really, really dominant portion of his career, and then kind of fell off after that. And then, is now retired, but he just really ended up being a kind of a dominant guy, at the end of his career. I think, with his pairing with, Rodney Childers, just a really good pairing of, crew chief and driver there that went on a huge run for, several years. And, up until 2021, from 2014 all the way through 2020, he was actually in the Final Four every year. So except for 2016. So just a guy that has always been consistent with the right team, and somebody that just went on an incredible run, and somebody that knows how to win. But then also with KHI, it went away in 2011, but he still was able to keep around kind of the foundation of that and turn that into a management and representation team. And now he's representing drivers throughout the sport and helping them advance their careers, and helping them get better from a management and representation side, not just like the opportunities, but giving them what they need to be able to kind of polish themselves from a media perspective, and be able to move on, get rides. And we're kind of seeing that with Josh Berry, and how they're helping him out in that, and also giving opportunities in late models for him to go out and compete and get ready for next year with Rodney Childers. So yeah, it's actually, I mean, a pretty big loss. I mean, he wasn't, in terms of star power, not as big as Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, or Dale Jr. But behind those guys, statistically, for him, definitely one of the better guys, in the last few years that you can say really left a mark in terms of competition.
Yeah, I forgot about Jimmy somehow, but Jimmy still theoretically is active, because he is going to go run races next year for his own team in Legacy. And so he came back to the Cup Series to run again, similar to like Michael Schumacher, retired and then came back. But he ran full-time, it wasn't part-time. There's been other instances of drivers coming back after retiring. So, I mean, like Mark Martin, perfect example. He retired and unretired and for 800 times, and his career went another, I think, 6 or 7 years in the Cup Series. Ran more or less a full, should have won the truck champion. If he had run the full truck series in 06, he would have won the championship. I mean, so there's examples of that in racing in recent times. Like Kevin Harvick has no desire to do that. It sounds like he's going to go follow the Dale Jr. plan, where he's going to run a couple of races here and there. I mean, I would like to. Dale Jr. wanted to run the trucks at Martinsville, but he's not a fan of the stage, the way the stages are and all that at Martinsville, especially with the Truck Series, knowing how bad the Truck Series drivers are. He probably didn't want to do that, but I'd still be cool to see Dale Jr. actually run a truck. Kevin Harvick, of course, made his name first in the Truck Series. And of course with KHI, with Ron Hornaday especially, It would be great to see him come back to the Truck Series again, but I think he'll probably get in an Xfinity car next year, a couple of races. Joe, go to you in terms of Harvick and his. I mean, him leaving the sport. We were talking about all those big names as well, and he is one of those big names. 60 wins, one Cup championship. He won all of the major races. If you think about the Winston Million races, he won all of them. If you want to add, you add the Brickyard to that. He's got the big five. He was able to win on any type of racetrack, minus the dirt. But then that was only a couple of year thing here in the late end of his career, which is not you can't really fault him on that. In terms of what the series was for the vast majority of his career, he was able to win everywhere. He was able to build an organization, and then as a father now is raising a kid who's trying to be a Formula One world champion. So that's why he needs to work on Fox, because he needs to afford how Keelan's going to be able to go to Formula One. But for what Kevin Harvick has meant in terms of, and what is, I think I'd put it to you this way. I mean, you can say your talk about Kevin Harvick, what he's meant to you as a fan and what he's meant in general, but does Kevin Harvick have pressure in terms of leaving the sport as a driver, but trying to, making sure that he stays as a voice to work with the RTA to make sure that the drivers are getting what they need and these teams are getting what they need? And then secondarily, while he's in the booth, can he be someone like a Charles Barkley? Can he be someone that is no nonsense and is going to give you the truth and really change the way we look at NASCAR races and NASCAR broadcasting in general?
I think it's interesting that you use the word pressure in this particular situation, because normally you would think, he's retiring, the pressure should be off, right? Normally that's what happens. You retire, the pressure's off, everything's fine. So it's interesting you use that, but I think it's a really carefully selected and still a good word to use. The pressure, I don't know that I would say it's a high level of pressure, but I think very similar. You made a few comparisons to him and to Dale Jr., and I think he and Dale Jr., I would love to know what they talk about off the podcast and behind closed doors. Surely they're going to be competitors still in some sense, with Dale Jr. doing the NBC part of the season, Kevin Harvick doing the Fox portion of the year. But at the end of the day, I think they're both in the booth for the same reasons. They both have a great appreciation for the history of the sport. They care about the sport in its current day. They're both recent drivers who can both give really good and coherent insight. But I think, too, it is, I would have to imagine some of it may be pushed by NASCAR, like, hey, see if you can do something here. Because these are two drivers. I mean, Dale Jr. already a Hall of Famer. Kevin Harvick surely will be a Hall of Famer. If he's not a first ballot, it'll not take him very long, just given the career he's got. But, there is probably some pressure, and maybe not necessarily on Kevin himself or on Dale Jr. himself, but there may be pressure from NASCAR, from the sanctioning body. The sport, especially this year, last year as a sport, we had a lot of highs. This year we had a lot of lows, and that particularly pertaining to the TV ratings. The Phoenix race this year, I think I heard, was down by, multiple million viewers compared to last season. And it's great we're selling more tickets, but ultimately there's going to be more people that have the ability to view the race at home. So that's a bad look. I know a handful of Dale Jr. fans who, after he stopped racing, were contemplating whether or not they were going to bother to watch anymore because they were so invested in his father. They were so invested in him and his career. And, I think by Dale Jr. staying on and becoming a part of the TV broadcast saved some of the viewership in almost like a damage control. In some way, I see Kevin Harvick being in the booth as something similar. Now, to what Josh said, Kevin Harvick has never been the most popular. He's always kind of teetered on, being unpopular and being popular at some times. But, he's extremely notable. He's had an incredible Hall of Fame career. And keeping a face like that, especially to my generation, right? We've been on shows before, Phil, where you've talked about, Davey Allison and Dale Jarrett. They were more your drivers, your generation. For people my age who followed the sport, who got into the sport at a young age, where we were born in the very late 90s or early 2000s, for us, Kevin Harvick is one of the last drivers that is still around, right? Kyle Busch is fun to listen to when he swears on TV because he's had a bad day and how he killed the car, even though he, maybe brushed it. But Kevin Harvick's actually good at TV. He can get you invested. He can get you to watch, and he can reel you in. And he can spit out a lot of good information to do it. I think that makes him such an asset. His ability to translate what it takes behind the wheel to the fans, right? To meet them in the middle and say, very plain and simply, this is what we go through. He can help you elaborate your, he can elaborate rather to help you get to figure that next step, that next level thinking, right? This is what we think as a driver. He has the ability to make you be able to comprehend that, to be able to see that as a fan. And the fact that they can keep him in front of the audience, I think, is a huge win. Really, he doesn't need this. NASCAR needs him more than he needs NASCAR at this point. And I think the same could very easily be said about Dale Jr. I think they're coming from very similar situations. Harvick, I would argue, more successful for sure, at least on the racetrack. But, I think they're coming from very similar situations. Harvick's meant a great deal. It's interesting because, some drivers, Jimmy Johnson, I felt like got a really pretty large send-off. Dale Jr. got a huge send-off despite, not really having as successful a career as some of the drivers who retired around him. Got a huge send-off. Jeff Gordon went out in pretty big fashion. Harvick kind of got a hashtag, and Busch got involved in some pretty cool things. But it was more localized. Like, I don't really feel like a lot of the other, they put up the forever decals on the racetrack walls, but it wasn't quite the send-off season I thought he might have. But nonetheless, I think it shows the fact that the folks in the sport are putting in any type of effort shows what he's meant, right? He's won at almost every racetrack. I think at one point he was within like one or two racetracks from winning at every racetrack, up until they, started playing around with the schedule more. He has won all the majors. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. We all know it. And I think one of the interesting things about him, and I think it's probably one thing we'll also say about Truex, his career, he's aged and gotten better with it. And it's not to say that he wasn't good, because he was really good pretty much right off the bat. He won the Atlanta race, won the inaugural race at Chicago, I believe collected another 2 or 3 wins within those first 2 years. 2005, 6, 7 rolled around and, scored some really big wins. Sure, went into a lull, but from there you could tell every time he learned something, he got better. And it got to a point where the closer was just no longer, it was a fun nickname, but it was no longer accurate because you could see it coming from a mile away. He was going to win that race. He would dominate it. He went from the closer to the dominator. And, a guy like that who, and especially, right, this podcast, we've talked about so much about these playoffs, this elimination format style, this era, right, this newer era. He was the first person to be a successor in this new era, right, with this elimination style. He won the first championship, and, up until a few years ago, he was almost a sure lock. You could almost just move him from the 16 to the 4, right? 2014, 2015, 2016, I think he only missed it by a few points. He had a bad race at Martinsville. 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, again, if he had just gotten around one car and not then subsequently spun out, would have been in the Final Four. A guy that just year after year after year was so dominant. Maybe, he didn't have the same success as Jimmy Johnson, so we don't hear about it as much, but he means a lot to the sport. And I think, the efforts that were made this year to promote his final year, while maybe they weren't super big and flashy, I think that shows it. He's not a driver that people are going to forget about. The fact that he's going to stick around racing is a huge win for racing, in particular for NASCAR. He'll keep fans there. He's the type of person who can get new fans invested because he cares.
And that's, I think, something that we're going to see. I mean, giving the way that Fox's broadcast has been over the last few years and basically not being serious, adding a serious person to the deal, what that will mean overall. Ratings-wise, I'm not so sure, but bringing a competent, responsible, mature voice to help Mike Joy out at the end of his time, basically, to go and look at that and see where it goes. The last thing we'll get into, I think, there's a couple things, but I'd say the car itself, I think we'll get into the car itself first, and then we'll say biggest surprises and disappointments. The car, we're all in some level of agreement with what we think about the car, what we feel about the car. I personally, at this point, I'm like, whatever Dale Jr. says, just do whatever he wants, because I think he knows, and because he's Redneck Jesus, everything he says is true. So, but in terms of what the car needs or what they should do, getting a different gear ratio so that essentially having fifth gear is only like an overdrive, so they only have a 4-speed transmission, making a different tire so that they'll have wear, which at Martinsville maybe was the first time since this car has come along where they actually had a compelling short track race. You look at the racing outside of cookie cutters is not really good. They've ruined road racing. But let's be fair. It shouldn't be about road racing in NASCAR. It was fine when they had, maybe a couple, 3-4 races on road courses. Jim France's obsession his whole entire time has been IMSA. His dad allowed him to basically run the IMSA show from the beginning or thereabouts once he was basically an adult. He's like, yeah, this you can do. And he's always been a sports car person, road racing person. But NASCAR has its place. It should be racing at some of the great ovals that we have in America. There's places now that are getting brought back. They're going to go to Iowa for the first time ever next year. They bringing back the Milwaukee Mile. You're talking about some of these tracks, short tracks around the country. They should be racing there. I don't need to see the Cup Series at COTA. I mean, granted, at least it means that they don't go to Texas twice, thank God. But, it doesn't fit. Going to Road America while the lap takes forever, the Road America race kind of was because the fans showed up. And when you talk about people actually showing up to races, the Road America, the fan base that you get to go to Road America is one of the best that you're going to see in the whole entire country, no matter what race it is. But they got rid of that for the Chicago Street Course. It's only been one race, one time that they've been there. So that's a new choice. Do I think that this will continue to be the case? Will they continue to do street course races? I hope not. That's for IndyCar. That's for Formula One. That's for sports car racing, et cetera, et cetera. I think the car itself, we had more parity in 22 and 23. We started to see what this series has been for a long time. However, RFK kind of shows that this car has given them an opportunity. If we were still in the Gen 6 platform, do I think Brad Keselowski would have been able in his second year as a primary, one of the owners of an organization, get his team to the forefront and have one of his drivers be as competitive as Chris Buescher was? No. You look at Trackhouse and they're being competitive. They weren't as competitive as they were last year, but Ross Chastain ended up winning 2 races. Ross Chastain was a factor for parts of this season, and they were a new organization just a couple, 2-3 years ago. You have Jimmy Johnson investing in the sport, taking and making legacy, and now they're going to be a Toyota organization. What will that bring to the table now that he has Eric Jones and John Hunter Nemechek? How will the transition from one manufacturer to the other go with this car compared to the Gen 6? Those are all different questions I have. I mean, I don't really care for super speedway racing. I never will. You guys have a bit more better fondness for it, largely because your favorite driver was really damn good at it, and he won a lot of them. But I'm not a fan of the way they race on super speedways. I'm not really a fan of the way that a lot of these guys race in general, especially in the feeder series. But in terms of this Cup car, potential is there. The car has good things about it. There are things they should change, but they won't. I think. What? I'll go to you, Joe, first. What would you say is, like, if there's 3 things that we could improve to make this car better in general? What would those 3 things be, in your opinion?
That's a good question because I think about it a lot, and I think it probably lines up very closely with what you've kind of already mentioned. The gear shift. Something's got to change with the ratio, the number of gears that there are, whatever. But having that 5th gear, I can't stand it, and it's weird because it's like it's just one more gear, right? But here's the problem: it's introduced shifting to tracks we've never shifted at before. It's introduced more shifting to certain tracks. And I think the more you shift, the more it hurts the at least the fans, the product. It hurts the product of the racing you get. And it's funny because we talk about this car was intended to be a road course car. Really it lines up with the IMSA cars pretty well and such, as far as the make of the vehicle goes, and it's totally slaughtered any entertainment of road course racing that we've gotten. There was some of the road course races this year were a little bit better than they were last year, but not by a significant amount. And it's also slaughtered the short track racing, the racing that I primarily thought was, the really good, the best of the best type of racing, with the Gen 6 car was that short track racing, at least for the lower downforce package. That real high downforce package they had one of those years, the short tracks was just a mistake. We've kind of just swapped to the opposite. This car happens to actually really be good for the tracks where you do way less shifting, or where the shifting hasn't affected the product, which are the 1.5 miles and Talladega, Daytona, Atlanta, the super speedway style racing. And so with that, I think the gear shift, they've got to figure something out, because theoretically, hopefully, it wouldn't affect still the product of the super speedway style or intermediate style racetracks, but the tracks where they do shift now, the short tracks and the road courses, hopefully it would help that, help the passability, help what they can and can't do. That one's a big one for me. It bothers me a lot. It's bothered me since the very first Martinsville race of last year. I was at that race and it sucked. It was terrible. The tires, another thing. This is not, I have a really hard time faulting NASCAR on this one, because I'm solely talking about the tire, the rubber. That NASCAR needs to collaborate with Goodyear. Whatever they did at Martinsville for the second race this year worked. It was good. It was great. And we need more of that. We need more of that across the board for next year at all of the short tracks and even at all the road courses. Like, even if that's something they can introduce to the road course races, that might save them at those types of tracks too. That's a big gain. The tires, they're just, because the sidewall is thinner, it's a smaller tire and it's a wider tire. The tires produce more mechanical grip for the car, so the car's gonna slide around a little bit less. It's just because too, it's a thinner tire. It's also got to be a more stiff tire, and because of the stiffness, I think it's not as wearing as much, and fall off at a lot of tracks really doesn't play a factor. I think we saw it play more of a factor in 2023 than we did in 2022, which I'm happy about. Like I said, especially at that second Martinsville race, whatever they did there really, really worked. But, being the owner of a more modern sports car that has those thinner tires, you realize those thinner tires, they are designed to last a really long time. They have to be a harder tire compound. So maybe in some way you could point at NASCAR and say, well, the design shouldn't have called for this, but at the same time, you don't know how maneuverable that design is at this point, with 2 years under the belt of this car, and it's just easier to try and redo the compound itself. As far as the third thing goes, you could probably swing me on a handful of things on certain given weeks, but I gotta be honest, I think the tire and the shifter would probably be enough to make a significant difference. If you really want to go another one, I would say maybe there's something they could do with the diffuser. And I mean, like, next to basically eliminate it. I know they took some of the strakes out from underneath the car, and I think that was helpful to a minimal extent, but I do think it was helpful. I don't know the underwing of the car particularly well. I'm no mechanic. I've never pretended to be. If there's something that NASCAR can do to redesign that particular aspect, or if I remember correctly, I think Corey LaJoy was talking about it on his podcast on Stacking Pennies about potentially, or no, it was Kyle Busch, about just completely eliminating the underwing for certain tracks. Seeing how easy the toe links break, I do have some confidence issues as to the mechanics of the car, how well they might hold up. But if it is possible to eliminate the underwing, at short tracks and at road courses where we are less prone to seeing those really, scary, devastating wrecks that aerodynamics might really severely affect, If we could eliminate that underwing, I think that would probably help. I can't promise anything on that because I don't know the aerodynamics very well. But I would say those are probably the three big things. The only other thing you could really add in there is changing up the horsepower. I think adding horsepower to the shorter tracks into the road courses would probably help.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going to go with it for you, Josh. The aero piece, definitely. I've always been of the feeling that getting the car off the ground, getting them off, not sealed to the ground as they have been basically since the Twisted Sister Gen 4 era, um, and they were messing with the bodies and all that. The sealing it off and not having any air going under is something that, to me, it's a stock car series, right? I mean, granted, in IMSA, it's sports cars. In the GT categories, they're running it more or less as far to the ground as they can because that's just the way of the world. But when I go out to go and get into my Kia, the thing's got clearance off the ground, but then you're actually having to drive on the road, and you have to drive, and you're not driving on billiard table smooth surfaces. Now, I mean, it's not really the case all the time in NASCAR, but getting the car off the ground instead of being sealed to the surface, the horsepower thing is just mind numbing. And I don't buy anything they say about, and Kevin Harvick said it on the DJD too, in his in his first retirement appearance, and he said that now you're basically battling for 1 horsepower instead of it was going for 10 or 20 or 50 back in the heyday, when it was an arms race between the likes of Roush Yates and then RCR and Hendrick and Gibbs and whatever. And Gibbs had Mark Cronquist. You had RCR with Danny Lawrence and them. You had Hendrick with, forgetting Randy Dorton. But then after that, they still had their presence. You had all those great engine builders. I mean, this day and age, I don't care what they say. A stock Mustang and a stock Camaro make more horsepower than an actual Cup car, or maybe less than the Xfinity car, which is why the Xfinity thing is the best package. But I think the horsepower is one thing because we've harped on it on the show. I also think that I would also go into the road course package, and it's like, what are we trying to do if we're going to have so many road races? And they've tried to bring more short tracks into the table. Are we able to go and focus on those things? Is this short track test they're going to have at Phoenix, one of the most crucial tests that they've had in recent memory, to go and change things and make it better?
I mean, yeah, it's a lot of interesting things you can go with that. I mean, the aero side, with this car, the one thing that was different that why we have the diffusers, because they kind of have generated the aero to go underneath the car, more than the front side of the car, so, or over the top, so they're still aero sensitive, but they redirected it underneath more than over the top, because they thought that downforce, they could make it less dependent on, I guess, downforce going over the nose and redirect it underneath, and that would help it with aero sensitivity and being able to run closer together. And you've seen where in several races where the guy in front that was trying to be, or that was gonna get past, was able to just aero block and continue, and it's gotten more sensitive. And obviously we saw that in the last race with Chastain aero blocking on several occasions with Ryan Blaney there, and that's become more of a tactic in recent years. And then also the the engine with the horsepower. I think they have to increase the horsepower, and yeah, there definitely should be at least the number of horsepower that's in a stock Mustang or Camaro, or I mean maybe trying to go with a stock Toyota or something like that, which definitely doesn't have the same amount of horsepower as a Ford or a Chevy, but there should definitely be something like that to kind of show more of the talent in the drivers, and being able to have a big big horsepower and everything, and see how this handles with this car. Because I feel like some of the shortcomings of the old car and the older generations with air sensitivity and all that stuff, if they brought into the horsepower from those cars into this car, I feel like it would be a lot different, but it could end up being more of the same. And then with the tires, I mean, the tires are the Goodyear needs to be able to figure out how to make a good lower profile tire that's actually good for racing overall. I mean, agree with you guys what you guys said about Phoenix and Martinsville having better tires in the last two races. So we'll see if that changes next year, and if they're able to bring something in. But I think really the horsepower thing is where they really need to focus in on, because I feel like there's only so much that they can do with the aero package. They could take off the clear portion of the spoiler and just leave the bottom portion that's solid on there, and I feel like that wouldn't really change much of the aero, because there's so much going on with the diffuser and the bumper and everything that's so big that they have to redesign. They'd have to start redesigning wholesale changes of the car, and then that goes into more costs and all that stuff. So I think it's hard to really focus on that. I think the big area that they have to try that would be really easy is just to give more horsepower, more RPMs, and eliminate shifting. So if I think you might see an improvement on the short tracks and everything if you gave more horsepower and eliminated shifting. And then I mean, the other stuff, you start talking about starting to redesign aspects of the car. Talk about bigger brakes that this car has, the wider tire that gives the increased horsepower, increase in grip and everything that makes it easy to recover. It's so hard to spin somebody out. It takes a lot to be able to do that, especially on short tracks, and you really have to hit them hard to be able to knock them out of the way. So it's definitely something that they have to look at for the future and everything. So I mean, there's a lot of things to like about this car. It races well on intermediate tracks and the bigger non-super speedway tracks, but honestly that's about it, and they still have a lot of work to do on the other types of tracks that this car races on. And you're starting to see a shift now with they initially try to get all the road courses in this series to increase the number of share, because this car is designed or has that design in mind and everything. But now we've seen last couple of years the road course racing hasn't been as good, and now we're starting to see a shift back to more ovals on the schedule. And I think you see that with the addition of Iowa on the schedule, and then all the big one, the Brickyard 400, going back onto the oval for its 30th anniversary. And I think the racing that we saw on the Indianapolis road course and road course racing in general, I think that definitely had a factor in deciding whether to continue on the road course or go back onto the oval.
Yeah, and that's where we have to look at it. I mean, you're bringing back bringing back a historic race and having Indy be on the oval again for the two main races that they have. They're only going to have they're limiting as many races. I mean, Roger Penske seems to be having a lot of races at his track now, but less on the road course itself. So that's nice. The Brickyard 400 coming back is a curiosity for sure. They're going to have to test the tire in the car to see what the best package will be to possibly make it a racy track, which has never really been in the stock car sense. Outside of, I think, 20 the year that Candy Cane, I think 17, when they had like 800 cautions and Jimmy Johnson blew up and wrecked in turn 3, going 3 wide and stuff. That's the most memorable finish in recent memory, other than for my personal bias with Tony and Candy Cane in 05, and then in 07 with Tony and Kevin and here Kitty. There's really nothing that's memorable, so we'll see what the next gen car can do. Joe, we're gonna let you go. You had got work, so ran a little longer, but we appreciate you being on. Let us know where we can find you on the socials and where we can find your work.
Sure. So, right now you can't really find much. You can find me on X, I guess. I still call it Twitter. I have a hard time calling it X, but whatever. Sure, X, if you will. You can find me on there at Passero Jr. Passerojr. I have been trying to keep it a relatively chill, quiet off season for myself while I partially gear up for next season and some future things that I may or may not be doing, more life related than professional. But you can find me on there. I will still be active on there. If you tweet at me, I will tweet back at you because I don't have too many followers where I can't do that. And just getting ready for that. I will be continuing my stage point updates next year. I will be at the Daytona 500 next year. So if anybody recognizes my face and wants to come say hi, come say hi. That's where you'll be able to find me for now. And then, as I branch out and get my feet wet with a few other things along the way, hopefully, that is also where you'll first find out that I have been branching out. So definitely make sure to follow me on there. I'm sure I'll be back on the show sooner rather than later, hopefully. But that's where you'll be able to find me for now. I appreciate you guys having me on as always. It's always fun to come on and talk racing, and I'll be around.
And happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, man. And we will come back around, especially when we talk about the Xfinity and the Truck Series here in a couple of weeks' time to review the season, since we're doing Cup today and then probably do Formula One for the sake of me just getting it done and over with next week, and then we'll go back to Xfinity and trucks because there's a lot to really unpack, especially on the truck side. So thanks a lot for your time, brother.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you guys and your families. All the viewers, happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see y'all real soon.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. And so let's do the last topic that I was thinking about, and disappointments and surprises. In terms of this season, I think disappointments, it goes into one comment for me. Denny Hamlin kept on talking about, this is his year. He ends up not being able to get to the Final Four again. And get that elusive championship. I think that's a disappointment. Now, a surprise, you could say, was 2311 in general, their performance, in that they had both Tyler Reddick in his first year at the organization winning multiple races. You had Darrell Wallace Jr. going and making the playoffs for the first time in his career and lasting multiple rounds, even though certain fans didn't want to see that. He stuck it to him. Chris Buescher, obviously, one of the biggest surprises of the year. Michael McDowell getting that victory at Indianapolis. It's not a surprise based on his career and what he's done, but the way he won at Indianapolis, as dominant as he was, to win his second career Cup Series race, that was a surprise. Legacy Motor Club with Eric Jones, after going and winning the Southern 500, having pace a lot at a lot of racetracks. This year, at least until September, they were one of the worst teams in the series. And then, I guess when Carson Osavar got signed up to take over for Gagson, they gave him more R&D money or something changed, and then those cars started to come back around. I think that was a disappointment. I mean, there were certain races that were disappointing. Some of these big ones, some of these road races. The surprise, I think, would be the debut of Shane Van Gisbergen to the world of NASCAR and his dominance at Chicago, which really, if you have seen Shane Van Gisbergen, wouldn't be surprising, but for most NASCAR fans, they never have heard of the guy, can't even pronounce his name, and he went out there and opened a can on all these Cup drivers, and they all were basically like, what the fuck? Which was made it great. Josh, what did you, are some of those ones that you thought of as well, or was there some different ones in terms of disappointment? I think Truex too. We talked about it earlier.
I mean, some of it we've already highlighted and talked about, earlier. But I mean, to kind of piggyback off of you there with Shane Van Gisbergen, I mean, I think it's not so much that he dominated that race and won. I think winning is the surprising part, actually, but the aftermath of that, how all of a sudden, winning, now he's going to transition into NASCAR potentially full-time. He's not going in full-time this year, but he's going to be making a lot of appearances in Cup and Truck and Xfinity this year, throughout the year. So I think that's the surprising part about that. And then also coming back to Indy, on the road course there, that was, I haven't really seen one-off guys come back so soon to try again. So I think that was interesting, and just how the logistics of his team working out on the supercar side to let him come over to the States and try to make it here. But it was definitely surprising. I think Trackhouse, compared to what they did a year ago, I think that was a little bit disappointing that they weren't able to build off of that quite as much. I mean, Ross Chastain did win 2 races this year, so you saw in parts where they were good, but then also saw large stretches where they were bad, and Daniel Suarez didn't make the playoffs again this year. So, and he wasn't able to capitalize on the opportunities that he had last year. So I think that's disappointing. I think, another disappointing thing, like we talked about earlier, Truex definitely disappointing in the playoffs. Hendrick Motorsports, with Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman not making it in, I think that's also, I mean, Joe already talked about it, that's disappointing. But to add on to that, I mean, Alex Bowman was leading the points at one point this year at the very beginning of the year back in Phoenix, before they had the Louver penalties and everything. Like, he was the points leader, and a guy that had led the points at one point ends up not making it into the playoffs at all. That's definitely disappointing there. So you have, and of course he had the injury and everything, but still, he wasn't really a factor after that injury and everything. So that was disappointing. I think, surprising that Kevin Harvick didn't win in the final race of the year, or not the final, but his final season, didn't have an opportunity to win. On the other hand, disappointing that Stuart Haas can't figure it out outside of him. So now that's going to lead into, things that potentially with Josh Berry. We'll see how he performs. I think it's surprising that Kyle Busch sold out to Spire all of a sudden. How quickly that happened. It's definitely surprising because of how much he's invested into KBM and everything, and how it didn't even last one season after he left Joe Gibbs Racing to go to RCR before he went and sold it off to and took Spire's offer that they made. So that was definitely surprising. On the other hand, another surprising move, Justin Haley going over to Rick Ware. That's definitely a surprising move that I think a lot of people been scratching their heads and everything. So that's surprising. I think AJ Allmendinger not having a really good year outside of the Roval. Definitely, I mean, he had some few runs here and there that were pretty good, but I think him more than likely going back to Xfinity. I think that's definitely a surprise to hear after 1 year in the Cup Series and in the 16 car full time. That's definitely both surprising and disappointing. So there, and I guess that's basically the Cup Series. I think trying to think. I think Denny Hamlin, of course, that's definitely disappointing for the platform that he has. Being able to not make it in. I do find it surprising. Bubba Wallace didn't win. He had multiple opportunities. He got better overall, I think, but they just couldn't figure out a way to win. So I think that was a little bit surprising. So there's a lot of things that were surprising this year from a negative perspective. And everything, but I mean, it's definitely an interesting year, and I think a lot of things that we played out. I mean, I actually a positive one surprise that Ryan Blaney won the championship. I mean, like we said, we didn't think he was going to win, prior to the chase and everything. Didn't think he'd make it all the way, and surprised that he somehow made it into the final four and won. So we'll end on a slightly positive note, but. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how all these things played out through the year, and what the storylines ended up being. And I think some of these storylines, we'll see how they carry out into next year with with all the changes that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot to look into in terms of, and we're only a couple, 2 months and change away from the Clash. You have a test at Phoenix coming up here next week. You're gonna probably have a test coming up eventually at Indianapolis and Iowa. Those are two new races. So those are things we have to look at. I think there's other things we have to see in terms of we don't know who Colleague is going to run next year, or at least one of their cars. I think the rumor mill and things have kind of put it out there, but they have one of their cars open. Rick Ware has one of his cars open. BJ McLeod came out and said he's going to run all the super speedways as an open car, and then they may run the road courses with Josh Bilicki, who got announced as a full-time driver for DGM next year in Xfinity. There's a few driver announcements taking place, so we'll get into all those as we go along in terms of disappointments and positives. I mean, in terms of the Cup Series itself, the fact that in theory they have 36 viable cars, how many of them are truly competitive on week-to-week basis is a different story, but they have 36 viable cars is something in terms of what I guess you want to talk about, or talking about that charter and where things are going to be going. I think that's a story to look at here in the next few months, is with the charters and with the new TV contract, how much of the pie will the owners get moving forward? And if that opens up an opportunity for other owners to come into the series, like Dale Jr., will teams be able to expand? Denny Hamlin, will Brad Keselowski, et cetera, et cetera. Or are they going to have to piggyback off of some of these teams that are around right now? I think that we're going to go and call it here, or, we'll finish with football here. We'll finish with football. For me, the 49ers, we'll finish with football. We'll also do the roundup, or not the roundup, but we'll do your sim segment, and we'll just cut it off that way. In terms of the Niners, for me, they dominated against Tampa Bay. It's no real surprise. The fact that Brock Purdy had a perfect passer rating and seemed to kind of do whatever he needed to do is a good sign. It was cool to see people that want to question his ability and say he's a system quarterback. He can be a system quarterback. You know what? Every quarterback at the end of the day is a system quarterback, unless you're going to say Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. Everybody has a system. The Jim Kelly had the K gun. That was his system. You had John Elway and Dan Marino. They dictated their system. Brock Purdy is in unison with Kyle Shanahan with the way this offense is run. You have Christian McCaffrey, who's one of the best players in the league. You have the best offensive tackle in the league in Trent Williams. You have Brandon Ayuk, who's becoming one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and Debo, who's just a freak and can do whatever. So you have a dynamic offense on the heels of the fact that Philadelphia was able to go to Kansas City and win in a close contest. Philadelphia is in just now. They didn't win the game in February when it counted, really, but it's still a bit of revenge if they were able to have a rematch, possibly in Las Vegas in a few months' time. It'll be something to see, but the Niners are behind Philly. They're going to have to do work and hope for some help, which Philly I don't think is going to be giving them. But they will play Philly in a couple of weeks' time, so that'll be an interesting contest. Losing Talanoa Hufanga for the season is tough. But, Jair Brown, they drafted him in the early rounds. They are expecting him to be a big-time player, and he came in yesterday and was able and held his own. Secondary starting to look a little better. The Chase Young, Nick Bosa defensive end combo is allowing for more sack opportunities. It's allowing Eric Armstead to feast. It's got Fred Warner back to normal in terms of his tackling. They just were comprehensively the better team. They were able to manipulate the Tampa Bay lost both their corners, so it made it very difficult for them to really be able to do anything. And when it comes to other injuries that went on, so credit to them. Big victory. Now they're going to have a short week. They'll be going to Seattle on Thursday night for the nightcap of the Thanksgiving Day triple header, trying to go and get a 2-game lead in the NFC West after Seattle missed a field goal, lost to the LA Rams. So if they can get that 2-game lead, it might be all she wrote. Looking at the rest of the season, Seattle's a tough team, but 2-game lead with this team, the Niners team, I think would be something. It would be very difficult for anybody to overtake them. For you, Josh, the Jags had a comprehensive response to their performance last week against the Niners. They came back out at home and said, no, that's not what we're going to be, and reinserted themselves as one of those teams that are going to be an AFC contender here come January.
I mean, the Jags went out and dominated the Titans throughout the game. I mean, it was just a question of the defensive line and offensive line being able to affect each team, and the offensive line protected well. Trevor had time, and Zay Jones also came back into the fold this week, so that opened up opportunities for Calvin Ridley down the field, and we saw him with 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards for the first time since a while, since the Buffalo game back in the beginning of October. And for Trevor, his best game in the last couple of weeks, where he looked like a good quarterback again. So it was just a matter of them being able to execute, but then also I think they got key guys back and they were able to take advantage of some of the opportunities that allows them to have there. And then defensively, they defensive line was able to just put pressure on Will Levis the whole day for most of it. We saw him fumble, saw him almost throw a couple of interceptions that should have been interceptions. He had 2 touchdowns, but it was more or less garbage time touchdowns. So even the stats might say it looked like he had a good game, but he didn't really have that good of a game overall. So he had all of that. I think the Jaguars probably played their most complete game of the season, I'd say, from that game. But then I was also expected going against the 3-6 Tennessee Titans on a rookie quarterback, and lots of problems with injuries and stuff, and Derrick Henry not as effective as he has been in the past against the Jaguars. So as kind of expected there, 34-14 win, so big win there. But now the question is, they've got a big game, possibly the biggest game of the season here against the Houston Texans post Thanksgiving. So we'll see if and it's a away game also, so we'll see how they're able to go out and play against them. Hopefully they come out with the win. So if they win, they have I think 97% chance of getting a home wildcard game if they win this game. So there's a lot on the line here. But if they win, they more than likely will probably have the division, because then the only division game they have left after that is against the Titans in week 18. So that's important. But this one here coming up in Houston is going to be definitely probably the most important game, and especially CJ Stroud, really hot as a rookie right now, and what he's been able to do. A lot of debate if he's outplaying Trevor Lawrence and everything, but honestly, like, Trevor Lawrence is Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud is CJ Stroud. So I think it's going to be an interesting game for sure.
Yeah, and when you talk about CJ Stroud and Trevor Lawrence, I think it's going to be a battle between those two guys and their two teams here for the next few years within this division. Two of the better young quarterbacks in this league too. So it wouldn't hurt to have, for the South divisions, to have some sort of a rivalry. So if it is Jacksonville and Houston, if it is Lawrence versus Stroud, I think that'll be something that'd be pretty cool. Two guys who are in the top of the draft here over the last few years would be good to see. Doug Peterson being a Super Bowl winning head coach, and DeMeco Ryans, who's looking at possibly being the NFL Coach of the Year in his first season, coming out of the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. So something to see with that. We had roundup in terms of what we're thankful for. Probably going to save that, some of that information, for next week, because we'll have the Formula One review We will talk about what we're thankful for in motorsports as well in the next step in episode 197. Previewing Abu Dhabi, we can I'll go and say that Fish Lips will win. You picked first, so I'll go with F1 Abu Dhabi GP. Phil Fish Lips to win. I'm gonna say Signs second and Lewis third. What about your podium for Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, Verstappen in first, obviously. Second, I'm gonna go with Leclerc, and third, I'll go with Sergio Perez. So repeat of what we had here at Vegas.
Yeah, so Checo third, probably more likely than not. I think that would be a likely podium, but who knows? McLaren will be back if it'll be a good track for them. You can't count out Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri, George Russell for Mercedes too. All those guys are in play here in the final race of the season. We got to look at some of the constructors' battles, some of the drivers' championship battles as well. Going into the final race of the season, we'll get into those more next week. Josh, what's going on in the world of iRacing and gaming? More announcements in regards to IndyCar and their termination with Motorsport Games, but the saga that is the IndyCar having a game and trying to make one.
I mean, that's been playing out. We've now seen that they've terminated the contract with Motorsport Games for making an exclusive IndyCar game. So we'll see what iRacing decides to do, if they're able to come to terms with a deal or a licensing agreement or something to get IndyCar back officially licensed as a series in iRacing. We'll see. But I mean, otherwise, it's there's been updates that are coming out. I think the most notable update, I mean, we talked about it last week, but they have since released a video, iRacing has, of their updates coming up. Most notable, the rain update that should be coming up soon in the next few months. Racing in the rain, and it looks very accurate from what I can tell. So it should be interesting to see how the track dynamics play out and how it feels in the sim. And they've taken a lot of detail to make sure that when the tires interact with the road, just like how you would have the tires interact in the road when you're racing in the rain, or just driving in the rain in general. So looking forward to seeing that update come out, and how intense on the graphics side and the processor side is that going to be, because that's a entirely new element that's coming into the game. So looking forward to seeing like that, what that holds there. Otherwise, standard stuff this week on iRacing. Of course, the all different opportunities to go racing. Formula Ford's racing at Lime Rock Park. 87's at Old Phoenix Raceway before the repave. ARCA cars at North Wilkesboro. MX5 Cup at Lime Rock Park. You've got the Delara IR series at Gateway this week. IndyCar, so the actual IndyCar at New Hampshire this week. Gen 4 at Old Pocono in 2009. You got Xfinity at Atlanta Motor Speedway, looks like this week. The iRacing Winter Tour for the fixed iRacing Winter Tour at Darlington this week for the 87 car and everything. So, and I think, this week, the last couple of weeks, iRacing has their annual Black Friday sales. So that's a good opportunity to go either buy a new subscription as a new player to the game and get a year off at, I think, like 25% or something like that, and then reoccurring users get a discount as well. So I don't have the numbers on me, but I'll probably just re-up there, or buy something like that so I can stop using the 3-month one and save a little bit of cash there, and just have that one-time payment. So yeah, that's all I got for sim racing this week. I don't know how much I'm gonna be sim racing this week. Obviously, family time and all of that. So not sure how much time Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and all that stuff, hanging out with family and friends. I don't know how much time I'll have for racing. I am considering, I guess, this week, because I have it on my laptop, maybe playing off of my laptop, but it's not the same. So we'll see how that goes. But as always, the streams at Twitch TV/usailor2 and the Twitter, X, whatever account, JP Huffline, and then our YouTube page where we upload the show, Gripster Podcast. So go on there and watch our streams and all our videos and everything, and interact and everything. And hopefully get this one with Joe out soon, so everybody can see it, and Joe can hand it out to all his people. So, and anyone that wants to market it to. So we'll have that out hopefully soon. So that's all I got. Of course, always glad to be on here with you, and glad we had Joe on the show this week.
Yeah, my bad. Of course, you'd think I'd know that after nearly 200 episodes. But yeah, and I mean, wouldn't do it without you. Wouldn't do it any other way. I mean, we end up talking about all different topics. I get to rant and rave and be a lunatic, but then we bring calmness and responsibility on your end, and also with Joe, bringing the knowledge and understanding of the sport. So it's always great when we all are able to do this. So I'll go and say, before we get on, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, for the listeners, and looking forward to that for me, of course, with my family, being able to go and have Thanksgiving. It's always great to be around family and be grateful for having these times and having these things, being able to have food and being able to be around family. That's also something that's when you look at the way things are, you can go and things could be a lot worse. So it's something we can bring up. And so that we'll look at in terms of positivity and positive things. We'll be back next week for episode 197, talking about Formula One mostly, getting a roundup stuff, talk about the NFL. And we'll go and do all that. You can find me at PGMatthew28 on Twitter, X. You can find the show, the Gripster Podcast, basically anywhere you hear podcasts. It'll be philipgmatthew.com. You can find it there. You can find me at philipgmatthew28 on Instagram too. So if you want to do all that, follow me, great. Follow and subscribe to the show, and we'll be back next week for episode 197 of Gripster Podcast. So for Joe and for Josh, I'm Phil. See you next time.